Hi, it's Pastor David Tart here with another Words for Sunday, a time in which we take a little bit of a forward glance to the text we're going to be reading on November 10th, 25th Sunday after Pentecost. And the purpose of this whole podcast is sort of, to one hand, to get us ready so that when we hear these words read and preached, that they become more meaningful to us, that we understand the impact that these wonderful words have on our lives. So it's kind of a preparation. But on the other hand, too, my vision of worship in this online environment is extremely immersive. Immersive in the sense that the word takes on meaning in our lives. And so during the week, we're reading these texts and we're trying to experience them, let them open our eyes to our daily lives and how they can speak to us. And then on Sunday, the immersion sort of explodes as we share that shared immersive experience in our worship on Sunday around the word and around the table and prayer, and also that wonderful blessing at the end and the call to serve God. I mean, that's kind of my vision and why I love doing this. So I think it's important that as a pastor who's been trained and vetted and all that good stuff, to kind of help you get into things. That's all it is. It's just helping you to get into things. And it helps me too, because it helps me to focus on what this word says. So in a way, doing Words for Sunday is an offering, but it's also um, a way in which I can be disciplined and stay in the Word myself. So, wait, this Sunday we have these readings. The first one is from First Kings. It sort of pops into our lectionary, pops into our reading life together. That's what worship is. It's a reading life together. We're reading Scripture on a regular basis together. But this First Kings story is really kind of roots us back in the wonderful Old Testament. Never forget that Christianity has its roots in Judaism. It's really kind of crazy for a Christian to be anti-Semitic, because that's kind of like being against ourselves, because we identify with the Jewish story and we therefore embrace our Jewish brothers and sisters in a shared faith that has its roots in Abraham. But anyway, we won't go into all that. But this First Kings is written in the history of Israel that was some really tough times, and it was tough going, because the very faith of Yahweh, the very faith of Jewish people, was on the line. Ahab was a terrible king. I'm not going to go the whole history of Israel, but there was a time when Israel had two kingdoms, Judah and Israel. Anyway, Ahab was one of those kings that was making deals at any cost. It's all he cared about was a good deal, and he married this pagan called Jezebel. In fact, she's often used as an insult. You want to call a woman bad name, just call her a Jezebel. Because she was seen as a prostitute. She was seen as trashy. She was seen as one who caused all the problems because she brought in paganism. She brought in the worship of this false god by the name of Baal. Well, whatever you want to say, you can't blame Jezebel, because Ahab bought into it. And he took the people of God, away from their faith in Abraham, the covenant, and into this whole pagan worship of Baal. And Baal was, quite frankly, a fun religion. It had a lot of feasting. There was not a lot of moral codes to it. And the people of God just fell into this lawlessness and a total, complete collapse of their identity as a people of God. I mean, it was bad. And Ahab was making all these deals with the Syrians, and it was just a really tough time. Well, God sends along the prophet Elijah, and Elijah and Ahab had a stormy relationship. But it's kind of interesting because Elijah kind of keeps the thread there. He keeps Elijah alive. Okay, he doesn't kill him, but man, he doesn't like him. Jezebel hated him. I mean, we won't go over history here, but it was a tough time. And God, all of a sudden, they wake up one day and there's this terrible drought. And here in Texas, in the United States, we know drought. We always laugh that we always get sad after every rain because that means the day we're a little bit closer to the first drought, another drought we're going to have. I mean, we always live in terror of a drought. And how, not terror, but fear of drought because of drought, the lack of rainfall totally kills everything, kills the crops, kills trees, kills the source of drinking water. I mean, drought is horrible. In fact, our African brothers and sisters live with that fear all the time of drought. And that's what happened. And people were starving. They did not have reservoirs. They didn't have electric pumps to pump the water out. they only had their wells. And when the well went dry, you had a crisis. And so we have this widow, all right, who's bearing the brunt of the drought. And it's bad. Widows at that time had a pretty rough life because widows depended on their in-laws to support them. That's right. When you got married, you became the property. Really, that's how bad it was for women in those days. They became the property, responsibility, if you want to use that word, of the husband's family. And you can imagine, during tough times, the first thing that's going to go is a widow. I mean, the family's not interested in supporting somebody who's not blood relative, right? And so she's there, she's got her son, right? And things are bad. She's down to her last meal. She's got nothing. She's got nothing. She's starving. She's watching her son starve, which is horrible. And so she goes out to the gates and she gathers sticks. She can't afford any other source of fuel. She gathers sticks. She'll make a fire. And she's going to make the last meal. And she's down to the bottom. She's got nothing. And she's living in the horror of not only herself starving to death, but watching her son die from lack of food. Bottom of the bottom. There's nothing under that. And along comes this prophet Elijah, wandering around, probably living in fear himself, wondering how he's going to survive. And Elijah sees her, goes home, and God tells Elijah about making a bowl, a jar, grain, and a jar of oil. And lo and behold, those jars never came into empty. They were continued to fill. It's a wonderful, powerful story how God meets our scarcity with God's abundance. And it's hard. Life is hard. And it sort of sets up the whole, I've been working on the past couple of days is how God speaks to us when we don't have anything. And what I'm working on in my sermon, and I still have a ways to go, so continue to pray for me as I incubate this thing, is that, like the widow, we have to recognize we have nothing. That we live in scarcity. I mean, we may think we're surrounded by stuff and surrounded by abundance of food, but we're probably more on the edge than we realize. If everything you have can be taken from you in a moment's notice, as to people who have experienced disaster in Spain, or anyone who's experienced a disaster. We're much more precarious than we think we are. And faith is everything to do with trusting that God's going to get you through. That God meets our scarcity with God's abundance. And I don't know what that means for you or me, but that's our faith, is that we never give up. There's an Elijah somewhere out there who's going to call us back. It's just powerful stuff. In fact, the whole text, what I'm really working on, this whole concept of offering. There's a lot there in the text we can look at, but man, this whole idea of what does it mean to offer something when you feel like you don't have anything to offer? And what does it mean to live life as an offering? And what does that look like? What does it do for us when we start seeing our lives as an offering? Realizing that we really ultimately don't have anything to offer. And I'll get more into that as we get into the Mark reading today. And this whole thing kind of continues, this whole idea of, God's abundance meeting our scarcity and God lifting up the lowly comes through in Psalm 146. And again, I invite you to read the whole psalm, because it's a psalm that really talks about lifting up the lowly. It's a praise psalm, because if we look at our lives, I think you could find times when that psalm is very descriptive in our lives, when God has lifted us up, when things have gone right in our lives, when we've been rescued in many ways and provided for in many ways. We can see God lifting us up through family and friends and whatever things happen, That's a good psalm to celebrate and read. And sometimes, again, that psalm is prescriptive, meaning that there are times, maybe we don't feel that way, but we can look forward to feeling that way, because God's going to bring us through. And then we get into Hebrews 9. Now, Hebrews, we're reading it through Hebrews. We took a little break last week, All Saints Sunday. We're back into Hebrews, and we have a couple more times we get to read Hebrews. And remember, Hebrews was written at a time when the people of God were really struggling. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that this was really hard days for the people of Christianity, because they were being persecuted. There was lots of debate about how Jewish they should be. I mean, all this kind of stuff was going around. And this wonderful letter of Hebrews is written. And what's so powerful about it, and I've talked about this in other words for Sunday, is that it's really calling the people of God back to worship. I mean, the whole book is just rooted in Jewish worship. I mean, if you don't understand Jewish worship, then you're probably not going to really understand Hebrews. But part of the Hebrew worship, especially on high holy days, is that the high priest, I mean, the one who's supposedly the representative for God, goes into holy holies, and God makes offerings and sacrifices to God to make things right. Okay, that's what this high priest does during the high holy days, and I won't get into the whole details of it. But what the writer of Hebrews does is says, hey, you know what? That's Jesus. He's the high priest. And what he offers is not, a sacrifice of whatever, goat or lamb, or not goat, but lamb or whatever, but what he offers is himself. He is the sacrifice for our sin. And because he has done this sacrifice for us by offering himself on the cross, we don't have to die anymore. He makes things right. He makes us alive in God. And on the last day, we'll see this, that he is indeed the high priest who has made things right for us. This Sunday is November 10th, which is Martin Luther's birthday. So it's kind of very cool that we're coincidental that we have this wonderful reading of Jesus of Christ as high priest on Martin Luther's day, because Martin Luther saw Jesus as that. We don't have to make sacrifices anymore. We don't have to make ourselves right with God through good works, because Jesus does that with his own death and resurrection. We don't have to. We don't have to live our life as a sacrifice to God, because Jesus has done the sacrificing for us. There's no good work that we can do, because Jesus has done the good work on the cross. We live in that kind of grace and freedom of what Jesus has done for us. And so when we think about our lives, and this is where it goes, we're going to get into this in a few minutes in Mark 12. I mean, when we think about our lives and how much little we really have, our scarcity, we meet the abundance of God's grace on the cross. That's what Hebrews is saying. And once we understand that when we worship on Sunday morning, when we worship together on Sunday morning, we are experiencing and seeing and hearing about the great high priest who makes things right between us and God, and right between us and each other too. Powerful stuff. Something to really think of. I would encourage you to read Hebrews 9, please. And finally, we get into Mark. Mark, yeah. We're running out of Mark. We only got a few Sundays left. In fact, I'm starting to think this might be my last shot at Mark. I mean, I think Christ the King Sunday we do Mark, but Pastor Dono is going to get Mark next Sunday, but Sunday after this one. But I'm preaching this Sunday, and I'm just really loving the fact that, okay, I've had this great long journey with Mark, and I've loved this journey, but here we have these stories at the end. These stories at the end of Jesus kind of living out Psalm 146. God lifts up the lowly. We've got these religious leaders, in the temple. Hebrews, right? And they're all really proud of their offerings to God. They make a big to-do. It's the ultimate fundraiser. They're just really prancing around like peacocks and all that they've given to the temple and to worship. And aren't we special because we're so generous with our gifts? And all of a sudden, along comes this widow. She's the widow in Elijah, really. I mean, First Kings. She's got not much. She's got a little penny. All she's got. It's called the widow's mite. A little bitty copper coin. And she puts it into the offering. And Jesus says, the widow gets it. Why? Because she gave all she had. She gave all she had. See, the widow understood something that these religious leaders didn't. She understood. And this is where I'm still working on this. She understood. Bottom line, this is going to be one of the points in my sermon, is she really had nothing to offer. Copper penny, what difference is that going to make? That wasn't going to do much. But she understood that ultimately we don't have anything to offer God, because God offers everything to us. Our whole life exists because of the offering of God. Life itself, your life and my life, is an offering to God. It's good God gave you the gift of life, and now God calls us to live our lives as an offering to other people. And what does that mean? When you see your life not as something you get, something you've achieved, but something that God gives you. You're called to be the offering that God calls you to be to other people, not because you're trying to achieve something, trying to get something, trying to be first, because that's just who you are. You and I are offering because God calls us to be an offering to others, and the joy of that. What the widow understood when she put that penny into the coffers. This is not about raising money. It's not about raising money. This is about living life as an offering in all that we do and how we relate to people. So God bless you on your journey. I'm looking forward to seeing you on Sunday. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited, as always. I think it's the best worship service we have ever. And here is Simon. Oh, and he'll be there, I think. And we're going to have a lot of fun together. So tell everybody bye, Simon. Wave bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.